Welcome to the SW7 Academy podcast with myself, Sam Warburton, and head coach Chris Toombs, and we will teach you about all the elite behaviours and training methods that you need to know to build you into the best possible athlete. Just a quick word about our sponsors, Tramshed Tech. Tramshed Tech is a collaborative community where startups scale up, a platform for growth supporting the tech, digital and creative industries. Like SW7, it's a community made up of high performers where having a growth mindset is key. Tramshed Tech can help you on your journey whether your business needs space to work, skills training or business support services. Their award-winning Startup Academy is open for registration for pre-start or early stage businesses. Tramshed Tech are currently expanding to new locations in Wales, including Cardiff, Newport, Barry and Swansea. So if you're an entrepreneur looking for space to work, business support or skills training, head to tramshedtech.co.uk or at tramshedtech on social media to find out more. Do you want to kick us off?
I think it's my turn, mate. I think you introduced session one, so now back to session two.
Yeah.
It's a little bit, obviously it's a little bit of my domain as well when it comes to sort of testing and benchmarking. I mean, again, just from our contextual point of view, I know we mentioned it before, but the reason why we want to do these type of podcasts is to just give our listening and our young players that opportunity to have a little bit more insight into our thinking and not just have a 20-second soundbite on an Instagram story, for example. So, I mean, testing, benchmarking, profiling, whatever you want to call it, I think that's the focus of today's session. And I mean, I know you and I have got our views on why we do it, and I'll hopefully expand on some of the reasons why I think it's really important.
Yeah, well, like you say, a lot of youngsters, when they ask us questions, I guess that's what you say, what's inspired this. You feel like we're not doing ourselves justice, but we're not helping the athlete who's asking us a question as much as we want when they ask us an Instagram story, because you're so limited in what you can say. But if you can listen to an in-depth, so a question might be, how do I test? And what's a good standard? Well, we'll go into that now over the next 30 minutes. So at least hopefully they can take away from this 30 minutes, okay, that's the standards of a professional athlete. I've got X amount of time to try and get there. So that's obviously your speciality. You would have tested God knows how many times over the last 20, 30 years. In a nutshell then, why do you test and why would it be so important?
Yeah, I think there's three main reasons really. Yes, ultimately we need a start point to manage and sort of benchmark progress. So ultimately, where are you now, and where do you want to go? And we then build an intervention to obviously work on that. Two, I guess the effectiveness of our programming, because as coaches and as players, we want to know that what we're actually prescribing is working. So those are the two main points. And the third one, which is really, really important, is a bit like you've just suggested, which is what are the trend analysis, or what does an elite level rugby player look like? And ultimately, if we haven't tested rugby players across these physical qualities and inevitably the rugby elements as well, we need to know what good looks like, or we need to know what elite looks like. Then we benchmark ourselves, and then we build a plan to work towards that. That's ultimately, in a nutshell, why we test. We want to know that, and I get asked this a lot on their stories, which is why this is great for a podcast, because we can really dive a little bit more deeply into the sort of detail of this, which is building an athlete is, relatively speaking, a bit like the elite behavior stuff, and it's going to keep coming back. It's process, and we want to build a really strong program around strengths, weaknesses. And also for me as a coach, the longer I've been in this game, I actually think we've got to keep working our strengths. And yes, we've got to still close the training gap, which is the weaknesses. But ultimately, going full circle into the three main points of why we're testing, if you want to reach elite levels, there's certain trends that you're going to have to inevitably kind of fit into to become elite, because ultimately I've tested thousands, other people have tested hundreds and thousands as well. We know what elite looks like, so we know you need strength qualities, speed qualities, power qualities. I know they all kind of intertwine. You know you need repeatability, you need a level of mobility and all those sort of things. So that's ultimately why we want to test.
So on that, I think people might be thinking now, okay, I'll wait for Chris to tell me what the standard is of bench press and squat, but testing is way more specific than that, particularly when you're talking about the power qualities needed for a rugby player. I think that's why And I've loved your idea since you've come on, and you've given people the opportunity to have access to this elite level testing in our lifting clubs, because they don't access that testing. So tell people, what is the sort of gold standard of testing that you use when you use your VBT and things like that, which a lot of people might not have heard of, because that's really what is going to be most transferable or more specific for the game of rugby than just bench pressing a heavy weight for 1 rep max. So what's the sort of testing that you do?
Exactly. I'm glad you mentioned that, actually, because the realities for me as a coach, and I think we've talked about this for years and years and years, the bench press, which ultimately is...
Because everyone says, what's your bench? I'm like, that's not important.
No,
it's not
exactly.
important.
And that's a crucial element around this whole testing piece, which is, what are the most important things we want to establish? Because then we can build this athlete, but also importantly, like we've talked about off air, it's all about this athlete education, the person. We need to focus on the person, the player, and then the athlete. Those are really, really important things. And these are lessons that I learned over time. Just boring story for sort of contextually. When I was a young strength and conditioning coach, I thought I had done my job when someone was bigger, faster, stronger, fitter. And then I go, there you go. There's an athlete who plays rugby. Whereas a couple of the Kiwi boys who came over during my career in Cardiff rugby particularly really helped me understand the person, the player, and the transfer. Those were the three keys then. And I know we'll weave our way into testing as we go, but the story is important. It was all about, can the work we do off the field transfer to a better player? That was always the key driver in the latter half of my career. At the beginning it was, well, the squat numbers are good, the bench numbers are good, the speed numbers are good, the fitness scores are okay, because I was always biased towards strength, speed and power, but we'll go into that as we go. But that's the crucial one for me, which is, does it transfer? Have I actually educated the athlete to know what's important? The bench press is not important. Shoulder integrity, shoulder care, really important. Going back to elite behaviors, go and do your shoulder prehab, because that will be a career saver down the line. And you think, oh, 100%. I can bench 120 or 130. No one cares. Can you produce force really, really quickly in your lower body? And week after week, but also in your lower body, because that's where all the force and the power is coming from. And that goes back to our testing piece, which is the kind of what you asked me, which was the gold standards. I mean, ultimately, I think the challenge we have when we've got a young listening group, and we might have people from all over the world listening who've got access to technology, brilliant. But that's the challenge you've got, and that's one of the main constraints you've got at the moment, which is, in order to benchmark really effectively, you need reliable and valid testing. So ultimately, that means expensive equipment, or some expensive equipment. I mean, just to give you a list of things that we've tested in the past, and things are evolving all the time, but there's commonality. I mean, you need speed gates, like laser timing systems for speed work. You know, a stopwatch is just not going to work in the 21st century. The error score is too wide. So you might as well just go, oh yeah, you ran a 4 for 40 meters. You need a level of accuracy that gives you a level of credibility. So ultimately, to get a speed score that's accurate is an indoor surface, a timing system, and then you go in things like jump mats and force plates and all that sort of stuff. Yes, you need to either be in an academy or a pro setup to get access to that, or if you're like us, you go to USW, or you build a relationship with a university whereby you can get yourself benchmarked with high quality technology. I mean, again, going back, I know we mentioned him in episode 1, but Mark Bennett was a phenomenal resource for the Cardiff rugby program back in the day, whereby the Welsh Rugby Union supported the Cardiff Blues and all the other regions when it came to physical development. So we had, and this is a really, really kind of key moment for me in my career, and you were part of this, doing our isometric mid-thigh pull. Yeah. So for those who don't know, the isometric mid-thigh pull is essentially pulling a bar that's not going to move, with your feet on a force plate, both dual force plates, so you get left and right side, and you ultimately are going to get some a strength and power diagnostic off the back of the work that you've done. I think we have put it on the story in the lifting club recently when you did your isometric mid-thigh pull at University of South Wales. So that particular test, amongst other tests, would be the one that provides most value for me as a coach who biases towards strength and power. Because ultimately, what the scoring system on that particular test does, it gives us an indication of how quickly and how much power you can produce. And that is the cornerstone of our programming. Do you as a player need to get stronger in order to produce more force more quickly, or do you need to do more rate of force development work? So ultimately you get to a crossroads where you go left or right to develop the strength qualities you need to get better as a player. Goes back to that point, get better as a player. Because it's great being a good athlete, but I think you and I have got numerous examples of players, remember that word, players, who were brilliant in the gym, but never got a second contract because they didn't do the work to develop their rugby. And ultimately, we're working in a professional rugby environment where even as a performance coach or S&C coach, I want the person standing in front of me to be a better player. And you mentioned it again off air, which was everything you did, even within a training session, whether that's a gym session or a field-based session or even video analysis, would be, am I spending time so that I become a better player? You know, yes, athletic prowess is huge. It is huge. It is, like we said again in episode 1, it's a physical confrontation at every single breakdown, and every single carry, every single tackle is an opportunity to dominate your opponent. So physical qualities are huge, but also tackle technique, game understanding, context of the position you are on the pitch, and having a clear mindset whereby, you know, don't give away a penalty in your own 22 or whatever the contextual variables are. There's psychological, tactical, technical, and physical. And ultimately, we're talking about the physical prowess of a player in this particular episode, but they all weave into one. You mentioned in the first episode again, confidence. Being physically capable and physically domineering allowed you to go on the field going, I've got the capacity to be on the winning side come the end of the 80 minutes.
Well, I remember you probably won't remember this. I was about probably 17 in the academy, and you said to me, if you can be 103 or 4 kilos and as explosive and as fast as you are now, you'll cause damage. And I always remembered that. And it worked, you know. So
yeah, let's go back to the isometric mid-thigh pull.
I was going to ask you about that. About what is like, what would be the good standard? Some people might have had access to that. If they haven't, we give that opportunity in our lifting clubs. But what would be a good score for somebody doing an isometric mid-thigh pull, for example, if they're new, and what you would expect? Like, what could they gain in 3 months?
The more important thing to answer is how fast you can produce the force. So Josh Navidi is a great example as well. He's about the same dap as your 100 kg man, but he punches his weight at international level because, I'm going to try and get the maths right here to maybe contextualize this effectively. But let's just say you did it recently, and you actually a 5,000 is a good score. Peak power, 5,000 newtons, which is essentially in real terms a 500 kilo isometric mid-thigh pull, is a good score. You're pushing or you're pulling essentially without moving a 500 kilo weight. Yeah. But it's the time, the front end, these milliseconds matter. So again, just to put into context, you weigh 100 kgs and Josh Navidi weighs 100 kgs. You've both got a 5,000 peak score. Yeah. But if you can produce your 80% of your peak quickly, i.e. within the first 250 milliseconds, that snapshot, that quick, and you've got a 120 kilo man who's got a 5,000, but his time to peak or his time to 75% or 80% of peak is 2 seconds, you will win that collision because you can produce your net force quicker than him. Are you with me? Which is where you punch your weight higher than the 100 kilo. You're carrying into a 120 kilo second row, but you can produce your 80% of your max quicker than he can produce 80% of his max, and your maxes are the same, you'll win that collision. And that's where you get the insights with the isometric mid-thigh pull that allow us to make good quality programming decisions down the line.
No, you explain that perfectly, and that's why I think when you've said, and hopefully people understand that now, power separates the elite from the sub-elite, that's what you're referring to, isn't it? How quickly you can produce that force. And that's what testing tells you.
Props are a great example. This is where the testing and having a big battery of, having a big pool of players is really useful for us from a trend analysis standpoint. The props, because they scrummage a lot. In a scrummage, I know nothing about scrum, I've never been in one in my life, but the two immovable objects are pushing against each other in an isometric position for relatively long periods of time. So what you'll find from a trend analysis standpoint, for the most part, props, because of the nature of their work, produce a relatively large amount of net force, peak force, but it takes them a long time to get to peak.
Yeah.
Versus the speedsters, the fast twitch animals, the outside backs, maybe you're an explosive character. Much, maybe not as big peak, but much faster towards that front end of your force development.
So would you do the same testing for props and wingers, but you just interpret it differently?
Yeah, exactly. The interpretation of the data is crucial. It's the same with every test. So we've got jump analysis now, so we'll do things like counter movement jumps. So I know the listener may or may not be interested, but hopefully we can share some of the sort of names of, someone like a Lee Halfpenny on the just jump mat. The just jump mat is relatively common technology that a lot of sports teams have access to, and even a lot of schools in this day and age, because the price point of entry is relatively cost effective. But I think Lee and a guy called Owen Williams, who tragically got paralysed.
I remember that. Explain the test, sorry, for the listeners.
So counter movement jump is literally stand on a jump mat with arm swing, just literally dip and jump as high as you can with your arms at full extension. Try and get as high if you can off the ground. So you got your Lee Halfpennies and your Owen Williams.
He was amazing. I remember that.
They were the first two that hit the meter, because I always knew that. Yeah, I know. But you've got gold standard, which is a force plate, and even on a force plate, they'd probably be jumping 60 or 70. The mechanism of how the benchmark works is slightly different. A just jump mat takes into consideration flight time, whereas the force plate is more sensitive to when the contact from the foot is off the plate, and so the scores are generally a little bit lower. But again, it's quite difficult to compare an apple with an apple. If you've used a just jump mat and then you use a force plate, you're going to get depressed, because you're going to have probably a 20 centimeter differential between a just jump mat and a force plate. But the force plate's gold standard, but they're also 10 grand. So there's a cost price point of entry, of course. But jumping is a kind of, I guess, primal skill, isn't it? So jumping, sprinting, isometric mid-thigh pull is slightly more specialist, but these are the kind of tests that we want to benchmark our players, and then we also want to compare them against international standards, elite level standards, and all that sort of stuff, which I put out on the stories quite recently, and a load of people asked for what are those standards, and I've got some fairly good information around what good looks like for you're not going to compare the speed of a prop with the speed of a winger. You've got position specific testing, and that again where Mark Bennett was brilliant back in the day. He would collate hundreds of test scores from all the regions, from England rugby, from Irish rugby, from New Zealand, Australia, wherever he could gather intel, he would pull all this together. So we've got a really good idea of what elite level looks like. So I know if someone's going to run a 1.5 standing 10 meter acceleration, they are a high quality.
That's quick.
Yeah, that's quick.
Have you had athletes who've done that?
I've got loads.
Who would have done that?
Tom James ran a 149.
Was he?
Off the top of my head, bump into him a fair bit now. He's a financial advisor, actually, because of injury and retirement. But Harry Robinson.
Oh, yeah.
Harry's a 1.4 something. I actually think Tom James may have been the fastest I ever saw. And this is a good story, and I don't want to expose him for his rugby playing ability, because he was an absolute physical specimen. So there's a player called Joe Adjua. Yeah. So Joe Adjua, I first met in the Leicester Tigers Academy. He's Nigerian descent, so ultimately predisposition for absolute thick, muscular winger. 141 standing 10, the most explosive human I've ever been exposed to in my life. And I'm actually glad that I've name dropped him in the story. But went from club to club, ended up going to the Scarlets for a while, but he was someone where physical prowess wasn't an issue, but rugby playing and his game awareness, and hopefully he doesn't mind, he's probably long retired by now, he's probably about 40, but he was the most explosive animal, 141. I remember him lifting a hex bar when I first got into VBT. I know this is going off topic a little bit, but it's kind of within the sort of technology and testing bit. He did a 270 kilo hex bar deadlift at 1 meter per second. And as you know, you understand some of those metrics.
Well, we go into that next episode, so you can explain that more.
But ultimately, he picked up 270 kilos like I'd pick up an empty bar. It was from a physical prowess standpoint, it was phenomenal.
Freaky, yeah.
But those are the sort, we can delve into the numbers from all these tests, but I know that a 140 something is exceptional acceleration over 10. Sub 5 was always the sort of go-to gold standard for a 40 meter sprint.
Sub 5,
Sub 5 was always the sort of gold standard, and then most of the outside backs would manage that. I know you did. I know you can tell me.
Up, I did, yeah.
494. I think it's 494.
Yeah,
sneak. Yeah, but 494 for a 100 kilo back rower who's also got other. This is the thing about testing as well, which goes back to the player. So when everybody's fresh and they haven't got rugby to consider, just building, and we've talked about this when it comes to American football and just strength, speed, and power outputs. The challenge we've always got in rugby, which is why this benchmarking and this testing episode is really good as well. You need, and we get asked this a lot on the stories, what's the best exercise for improving a scrum half? What's the best exercise to be a back rower? Yeah. You need speed, so we can test speed. You need strength, we can test strength. You need power, we can test power. You need repeatability, we can test repeatability. You need fitness. Rugby is a game that requires all physical variables to be factored into your physical preparation. You work your strengths and you obviously close the training gap for your weaknesses. You never liked high volume work. You just died because you're a fast twitch athlete, and we can diagnose that through our strength diagnostic work.
So for me, that's what I needed, because it was all different to individual.
Yes and no, because the more you work on the endurance end of the spectrum, the more you blunt your high quality speed, strength and power quality. So that's the challenge we've got, which is you've got to work your strengths, which was your explosiveness, and repeated speed. You used to 4 or 5 reps. Chris Checker is another one. Great bloke. 6'4" winger, flat speed, 4.8.
Yeah,
you ask him to do three. You ask him to do 3 40s with less than a minute's rest between each, and you got a 4.8, a 4.9, a 5.7. You're talking about because it's the makeup of your genetic predisposition. Yes, we can work on repeatability, but also, do we want to blunt those qualities that have made you the player you've become? So, another great example. You'll laugh at this as well. Paul Tito, one, he had the heart of a lion, which is obviously hard to measure, but 2, he was much more of an aerobic animal. He would run from ruck to ruck. He would tackle anything that moved. Definitely underpowered, without a doubt, and he'd admit that himself from a physical development standpoint. But his appetite to work and his repeatability was excellent. But he would potentially get dominated in the contact because he hadn't got those strength qualities to be as effective at ruck time as, say, someone like yourself who's lighter than him, but more destructive from a physical prowess standpoint. And there's also the balancing act of, different players. I mean, if Paul played, you'd need a big second row to go with him, like a Bradley Davis, who also had a great engine, by the way. But his appetite was also... Brad, funnily enough, was one of those players who had unbelievable amounts of repeatability, but also, because he loved bicep curling in the squat rack, he'd also have... he was 125 kilos at one point in time, and Paul was 110 at best.
I actually think he's the best second row athlete I've ever played with, Bradley. Who covered everything. He's so good.
Going back to, I know we didn't name him in pod number 1, but talk about elite behaviours. Yeah, Brad might have been one of the boys having a joke and a laugh in the gym and living. I think his career longevity is fantastic. He really, really surprised me a couple of years ago, actually, when I was at University of South Wales. He came in his off season to do his pre-season on his own, with his own programming that he had basically gathered over the last 15 years as a pro and written his own pre-season plan. And he was there on his own, week in, week out, doing his work because he had that kind of athlete interest in physical development and keeping his physical qualities. But that's the sort of player you want, which is, I know it weaves back into elite behaviours, but someone who really takes an interest in physical development and keeping on top of his game. But going back to the test scores, the trends come and go, don't they? It used to be aerobic development, used to be the 3K run. Then it was the 1.2 kilometre time trial. There was the 12-minute Cooper's run. Then there's the Bronco now, which is much more popular, which I think is going to lead you into a question you were going to ask me about what can kids do with limited equipment.
I was going to say that before. Because everyone loves the Bronco test. They see all the Kiwi lads doing it on social media. What is your honest opinion of the Bronco test and how specific is it for rugby?
Grenade! Grenade!
It's true though.
Thanks, buddy. No, you're absolutely right. And this is a really interesting one.
It's easy for people to do, and it's a decent guideline. But as a coach, if you had a pre-season to run, would that be the one single test you use to measure aerobic ability?
Mate, that is literally the grenade of all grenades. It is because the Kiwis have done it, and we've had a lot of high-profile players run like a 420, which is exceptional, by the way. I would, in hindsight, how many of these tests really are going back to transferability? How many of them are really specific to rugby? I don't think they're more about general physical qualities, but. I'm trying to think of a decent answer.
Because when I did it, I think it's getting more specific now. So I've noticed playing rugby can go up to 3-4 minutes on a freaky occasion. So it does show that you have got to run fast for 4 minutes. So you have got to have that ability. But I just mean generally, what would be your go-to?
I think it's all, and this isn't making an excuse. I've just been trying to be realistic. It's about the time demands to run an aerobic test. By definition, takes longer than a speed test takes 10 seconds to do the whole thing. Whereas an aerobic test, by definition, should be prolonged and over a relatively long period of time. I think the 120 meter run, a 1,200 meter run would be the one for me, which is essentially less than a 4 minute test. Yeah. I think it's about trying to get the outcome you want, which is basically benchmarking aerobic potential in the most efficient manner. And you can run you've got your yo-yo tests, you've got your 30-15s, your intermittent recovery runs and all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, I mean, I would potentially go back because the aerobic system is very, very important for rugby. I mean, that's one thing to definitely reinforce as well, that you can't just work, even to my bias, strength, speed and power. You do need that aerobic capacity for various reasons. One, efficiency and recycling of energy systems, but also it's recovery. There's fitness and there's speed and power, and you need all of, like I said, you need all of it. But I would potentially lean towards going back to a 3K run. It's miserable for the player, especially miserable for the fast twitchers, but it does give you a really good indication of aerobic potential and potential prowess as well. The
reason I ask is, we actually do, we actually prescribe people a 3K run and a Bronco, because if you do that, I think you've got to look at it as a test. So if you do that and you do the running sessions that you prescribe, when you go back to it, it's a good barometer and you can see you've improved from it. So,
absolutely.
But the one thing I was going to say, what's a good benchmark, because people can do Bronco, and I'd say go and do a Bronco so you can see how much fitter you can get in 3 months. The only one thing I'd say is be careful, because obviously if you run on your club pitch, which is a 48 metre halfway line, and somebody else runs another club pitch, which has a 51 metre halfway line, over the course of a Bronco test, that's a lot of time. So take it with a pinch of salt these times and focus more on your improvement. But what would be decent Bronco times for listeners to aim for?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean,
a pinch of salt, mate. You need to make sure you've got exactly the right distance.
No, sure. People don't. If you haven't got a tape measure and you're just running 22 and back, 10 metre line and back, far 10 and back, like you say, it might be 100. What is it? Yeah, 8. What's the shuttle? It's 100. Should know this. Right, yeah. 20 and back's 40 plus 80 plus 120, whatever that is.
20 plus
240. It's 240 a rep. But like you say, if you're running that and it's 248, as long as you're doing the same reps on the same pitch, but again, is it dry, is it wet, is it raining, anyway, all those things. But that's why it's good in a way, because it can be a crude barometer. Let's call it a crude barometer for those who have access to nothing else. It's not a bad one. 20 and back, 40 and back, 60 and back, five times. I mean, under 5 minutes is a benchmark of good. You've then now got, I know on the social media during pre-season, you'll have people put in a 4:25 or a 4:30. That's the nines. The nines are looking at a 4.5 minutes.
I mean, the scrum halves are fitness now.
The scrum halves and maybe some of the back rows, but again, you've got fibre type to take into consideration as well. Those who are fast fatiguing athletes, like the explosive sevens. So you've got a guy who's just played out in Seattle now, a guy Nick Penny. I've talked to you about him before. Really explosive, very quick, very strong. Loves curling in the squat rack as well. But he's an explosive 7, and he's destructive at the breakdown. But you ask him to run a Bronco, 5:30 would be a good time for him.
Sure, thank goodness you said that, right? Because I'm glad that I had someone like yourself who could educate me on this, because when I said I needed anaerobic repeatability, I worked on it to get it to a good enough level. but I always knew my point of difference was my strength and power.
Yeah.
But I remember coming to a pre-season and one coach put me in the, like we had 4 weeks off and he put me in the 5-minute group for a Bronco. And there was a 5-minute 30 group for the front fives. And this is day one. So they're obviously trying to shave 30 seconds off everyone. I said, oh, mate, I'm going to have to go in the 5:30 group, you know. I wasn't being negative, so I'm a positive guy. I just know reality. I just know what my body's like. He was, no, on your back row, you'll be fine. You'll be in the 5-minute group. And I was with all the whippersnappers, like the fit back rows, the nines. I did the Bronco test. I remember I was like, after about rep 3, suddenly people are coming past me who shouldn't be coming past me. I remember I was running back to the home straight to the try line. I was like probably like 20 meters out. I remember he was like 5:25, 5:26, and he's got 5:29. I dived over for 5:30.
Commitment.
But I realised if I can get myself down to a 5-minuter, that's good for me. I know there'll be back rows who can do 30 seconds quicker than me, but you need to keep your point of difference. But yeah, I just think for people to realise, and that leads into my next question, a lot of this testing, can everybody get to that level? Is it down to hard work, or do genetics play a big factor into that as well?
There are genetic predispositions. I mean, go back to the Joe Adjura example. I'm never in a million years with the best training program, the best coaching and the best everything going to run a 141 standing 10. And neither is 99.9% of the population. So there is a little bit of that. But ultimately, we are using, to kind of summarize all of these tests, we are using this battery of tests to get a good picture of the player's physical capabilities and where we can improve. Everybody, I think, can improve their acceleration and their speed scores. Improve your body composition is the fastest way to get faster. People say, what? But it goes back to, again, the elite behaviors piece. If you're optimal body fat, you're carrying a weighted vest around, lose the weighted vest, you'll run quicker, with all things being equal. So if you've got optimal body fat levels, you will run faster. So running faster is easily achievable for all players. But it's not just about body comp, of course. It's about being exposed to strength work. It's being exposed to good quality speed training. It's being exposed to, having the right mobility and the right kind of mechanics and all that sort of stuff. I think every physical quality you can improve without a shadow of a doubt. The margin for growth and improvement and raising that ceiling is going to vary from exercise to exercise, from body composition through to, strength qualities, through to, like I say, speed qualities. If you're a prop, you won't run in the outside back speed times anytime soon. You're just not. But you can get a 10th quicker. You can maybe get more than a 10th quicker.
I was going to say that. So which ones do you think are the hardest to develop? Could you improve strength much more so than speed, or vice versa, or fitness?
Nice
more
question.
So
Really, and this goes back to our consistency in our doing the work over a prolonged period of time. Strength for me takes a long time to develop, and speed in tandem. So what I mean by that, and you're a great example of this from your academy days, to go from 100 kilo squat to 200 kilo squat is going to take you 2 years of discipline, diligent, showing up consistently and doing the work. And the reality of that, in the beginning anyway, you'll get quicker as a result of that, because of your ability to produce force. You're going from 100 to 200. That is a true story. You did that. Fitness for me is the easiest quality to develop, and it doesn't take very long. So when I go on the stories, for example, on Instagram around what's important, physical qualities that take a long time to establish are things like strength. You have to there's no hack. There's no shortcut. There's no shortcut to develop fitness either. It is hard work, but you can do it in a much shorter time frame. So developing strength takes the longest, but also then maintaining that is such an easy... Maintaining a squat of 180 kgs, once you've got there, is 2 sets of 2 once every 10 days. You've got it. And even endurance, once you've got a level of capacity, keeping it is relatively easy. It's just the time to develop these qualities is the time consuming piece. And it's about what you've said before, being patient, trusting the process, getting the work done. I know these are the things that keep coming back, but that's the truth. You've got to do the work. And then keeping hold of those physical qualities. I mean, even now, you did a 5,000 isometric mid-thigh pull, having not done any strength and power work, because you've got a strength reserve that you've built over 15 years of being exposed to good quality strength training over your career. Top up, exactly right. Yeah.
So a couple of things, and I don't want this to sound like a shameless plug or to blow smoke up your backside as well, but that's why we've loved bringing you in, because we were all about training like a rugby player and having access to training that you can't get access to. And since you've done the lifting clubs, that's what it's really done. It's opened people's eyes who've come, and anyone can drop in, by the way. So sounds like a shameless plug. It is, because if you want to get this test, and you can do it with us, so just keep an eye on our socials when you can do that. But I love that you've brought that in. But for people who don't access that, and I know we didn't really want to go there, but there are strength barometers that we can use anyway. What would be some of, for people who can do your squat, your chin, your bench, what would you say to them is a decent, good strength target for them to reach, and how would they measure that?
No, so transfer stuff, I know there's a good question in fairness, because a lot of people won't have access to that tech. And you can, if you're in Cardiff area, lifting club is great. You've got access to force plates, lots of different technologies. We haven't even talked about VBT. We've got a whole episode on strength.
It's coming up.
Oh, we've got a whole episode on power coming up. But ultimately, a broad jump, a standing broad jump is a great barometer of lower body power. Stand on a line, jump forward as far as you can, and measure it. That's a great indicator. We've talked a little bit about bench. I personally, even as a coach, gave very little credit to the bench press. Yeah, it's great if you can bench 150, but is it going to make you a better player? I'm not convinced. Have you got? So we asked this a lot on the stories as well. So 2 times body weight squat. Good range, not one of these quarter squats. We all know what a terrible looking squat looks like. Minimum to parallel. 2 times body weight is considered good, but also, again, without harping on about it, it goes back to transfer. Is it making you a better player? Because the return on investment to go from a double body weight to a 2.1 times body weight squat may not be worth the effort. Yeah. So if you're 100 kilos and you can squat 200, adequate levels of strength to become a better rugby player. Let's get that always at the forefront of our thinking. So two times body weight squat, 1.5 times body weight bench, and probably a 1.2 to 1.3 times body weight pull up. What I mean by that is it's body weight, which is you, plus a percentage of your body weight for your pull up. If you're going to use something like the hex bar deadlift, which is a favorite of mine, probably 2.4 times body weight. So a little bit more than your double body weight. Bench, 1.5. I mean, if you're into your power cleans and your Olympic lifting, I think body weight for a 100 kilo rugby player is good. There are people out there. I know John Fox down at the Scarlets was a phenomenal, power cleaner back in the day. I think he had 3 plates. I think you did at times a hang clean with nearly 140 kg.
Yeah.
You know exactly what you know.
I don't forget this stuff. I'm hanging on to that bad boy.
Yeah, a 140 clean is exceptional for a rugby player. So if you are going to Olympic lift, I think body weight plus with really good form is a kind of benchmark. I don't really go near the snatch for a 1RM just because of shoulder integrity. Rugby players, I mean, my go-to, it's not a test, but hang clean was my probably go-to Olympic lifting variation, or a clean pull. So derivatives of the Olympic lifting variations, but I think those 4, squat, deadlift, bench, chin, or prone pull if you've got access to a horizontal pull, but probably just over body weight, 1.2. I know if you can marry up your bench and your pulling strength, they're crucial, because that's more about shoulder integrity than anything else. And it's really, I'd rather overemphasize pulling than pushing strength.
That's a really good point, actually. And I bet you there's people out there who are going, I've got a 1 times body weight chin, but I've got a 1.5 times body weight press, which isn't good for your shoulder.
No. And the one on there which makes me laugh every time, if your bench press is better than your squat, you've got big problems.
We had a fella like that, didn't we? We did have a boy like that, I remember.
We've got a couple of boys who would have a better bench than squat. And
you need to give yourself a hard look in the mirror if that's the case.
Lower from a bias perspective, in terms of what you should be focusing on as a young player as well, as you've suggested on many an occasion as well, never skip leg day. That will differentiate you down the line. If you can do a minimum of 2 lower body sessions a week, I know I like the full body, programming, but 2 exposures a week minimum, ideally 3 as a young player, you will be, like you said in earlier conversation, you will leapfrog everybody else who wants to skip leg day and just do shoulders and arms.
Big time. Well, you talk about strength stuff then, which I think will go nicely into our next episode, which you'll definitely want to listen to, because the most important attribute you discuss is power and how we develop that. So obviously that and strength are closely linked, and how that works in that relationship, but we'll go into that in the next episode. But don't miss out on that one, because you're going to give your opinion on how to develop power, how we do it, and why it's so important. So don't want to miss that one.
You bet.
Bye.